Ask the Podcast Coach for September 4th, 2021.
Let's get ready to podcast.
There it is. It's that music that means, hey, it's Saturday morning. It's time for Ask the Podcast Coach, where you get your podcast questions answered live. I'm Dave Jackson from the schoolofpodcasting.com, and joining me right over there from the shed, you got to love that. It's Jim Collison from theaverageguy.tv. Jim, how's it going, buddy?
Greetings, Dave. Happy Saturday morning to you. I thought it was good. We have a house guest today, and the room is right next to the studio. And I'm not saying they can hear me, but it's pretty much like I'm in the room. So I was like, well, we could go out to the shed and do it here. I've got this kind of set up out here to be able to do it. So thanks for letting me go remote today. I appreciate it. Hopefully I sound okay.
You sound fine.
Good.
And but the big question is did you bring the coffee with you?
I did bring the coffee with me because the coffee goes everywhere.
That's excellent. And of course, that coffee pour is brought to you by our good friend Mark over at podcastbranding.co. If you need a piece of artwork, if you need a logo, if you need a full website, if you go branding, what's a branding? Well, he can do an audit for you. He's an award-winning graphic artist. He's a podcaster. He's Canadian, so he's going to be polite. So what more do you want when you need an awesome logo or website, things like that? And I'm not just saying nice things because Mark is paying me, although he is a sponsor. No, if you look right now on the screen, the little Ask the Podcast Coach logo down there, that's Mark. If you go to Podcast Rodeo Show, that's Mark. If you go to if you go to School of Podcasting, that's Mark. So if you need a great logo, a great website, then you got to go talk to Mark over at podcastbranding.com. .co. Did I say .com? .co.
That works even on the headset.
It does. And I want to say .co.
.co.
Okay.
They'll get there. I think they'll get there. Big thanks to Dan Lefebvre, who's sponsoring the mug for another month. And so, Dan, thanks for doing that. Based on a true story podcast.com. Oops, sorry. I pulled it down. This even works. This shows up a little bit better out here than it does in my studio, based on a true story podcast.com. They recently did Band of Brothers. So if you're a big Band of Brothers fan, so World War II stuff, a 3-part episode over there, and they kind of, based on true stories. So they go through the historical content there. I haven't listened to those 3 yet, but I've heard that Band of Brothers is pretty close. So,
and you know who started a podcast about Band of Brothers?
Oh no, I do not.
Tom Hanks
really
is doing, because it's
nice.
it's like 20 years since that came out. It's been a while, because I saw it in the news and I was like, Tom Hanks doing a podcast. So what that really means is he'll probably do 3 episodes and talk about it or whatever. But nonetheless,
I don't think so with Tom Hanks. I mean, that dude is solid. Like if he does anything, he does it. So,
And the great thing about it is there's a guy that has a passion for World War II and that whole night,
veterans.
So I could see him just loving that, being able to go crazy and just go in deep. I had a audio clip and I can't find it, but it was the first Batman, Michael Keaton was on Conan, and he said, so like, how do you like this? Because Conan now is just a podcast. He's put his show to bed. I don't know if he's officially off the air yet or whatever. And Conan said, this is the best thing ever. He goes, I don't have to do makeup. He goes, when you talk on a talk show, he goes, you're hitting 3 bullet points that have been hammered out through your producer. And he's like, this is the best thing ever. So I was like, that's a good clip.
Conan was always a better writer than he was a performer. He was a writer. He was a comedy writer before he did his show. And so I think he's back in the medium that suits him best.
Yeah.
And so we wish him some success there. Dave, the elephant in the room, I think, though, is last Saturday.
Yeah.
like what happened last Saturday?
Yeah, last Saturday.
What did we learn?
What did we learn? Well, we learned that in the same way that StreamYard is an awesome streaming platform because it's designed to do what? Live stream. So
it is.
Cool things like lower thirds and, different brandings and things like that. There's a private chat room, all sorts of fun stuff because that's what it's designed to do. Now I have yet to turn it on, but I think you can get separate tracks.
Got to pay for it.
Yeah.
It's the pro, I think the pro version.
Yeah. And I always wonder how that works if somebody jumps in the middle of a call. That's my whole question. Like how that's a
good question.
That's got to be a sinking nightmare. But I've been using Squadcast for years, and I've heard people talk about Riverside for recording an interview. And what's kind of dumb about that is I didn't use them to record an interview. I saw where they also had a live streaming option, and I was like, oh, let's give this a shot and ask the podcast coach. So I did a couple quick, just me and a laptop. Like I invited myself to my own thing, and it was like, okay, but I was only looking at it from my side of producing it.
Yep.
And I saw where the video wasn't great, but I was like, but it was really bad last Saturday. So, so that was, that's what happened. So I don't think Riverside is bad. I know enough people. I know Matt Passy, swears about it. James Cridlin uses it for Podland. I just comparing StreamYard to Riverside is kind of not fair.
No, you're right. You're right. Yeah. I'd hate for anybody to get the impression like we were talking about it in pre-show, and I'd hate for somebody to go based on last Saturday, say, well, I'm never going to try Riverside now because that didn't work for those guys.
Yeah.
Because it's a different tool, right? I mean, it's a crescent wrench and we use a hammer. So, you just don't want to use a crescent. Well, you could, but it's not very clean, right? And so I think, like you said, it kind of comes from the live aspect with audio first. And I know StreamYard depends on some of this too, but this idea of storing local and then uploading later is always risky. Like that is just because you just don't, if I'm depending on my guest to not close their browser, after and again, I'm not saying it's bad. It's just, I think for most people, it's risky. It's very, very risky. So you have to make sure you're covering your guests with, okay, hey, don't close your browser.
Yeah.
We've got some rules here. Last week, I mean, we ended the show and it said, don't close your browser. And I said, okay. So I left it up, and I left it up for 2 hours and it was still at 30%. And I pinged you and I was like, should I be doing something different here? Because it still says 30%. I think the part that you lost of me was that 30% that never uploaded.
Yeah,
and
probably.
So, because we cut in and out a couple times, right?
Yeah, and I know Coach Dave had jumped in, and yet his said he was either uploading or still. And that's what you got to remember. They're doing 4K video. So I think part of it was me going, like, I moved the audio over. I think I went and got a drink of water. So it'd been, I don't know, maybe 10 minutes. And I go to the back end and it's still uploading stuff. And I'm like, this is ridiculous. So I just went in and deleted Coach Dave. So that's why I think we got about the first 48 minutes of the show. And then it just went.
It kind of just went to crap. Yeah. Well, I got lost. I got dropped a couple times. And,
The other thing I found out was I downloaded the video. So I had the video tracks, not the whole thing, because your video track was just black the last 52 minutes. But I put those video tracks into Camtasia, and you can do some cool stuff. But you better have a serious machine when you have 3 and 4 tracks of 4K video, because it was cool. I could basically, I made the little logo jump around, like it was fun. But I was like, oh, this would take another 4 hours of, if you really wanted to, add text overlays and stuff like that. So I was like, and again, this is where StreamYard, lower thirds and things like that, and the ability to share screens. I was like, I gave me a new appreciation for StreamYard. So,
well, especially in the simplicity. Did my audio just go down a little bit? I've been messing with. Okay, there we go. Especially with the simplicity, I think for most people who are doing live stream, they kind of just want to jump in and get it done, right? Well, as opposed to messing around with it like we did last week on Riverside.
And that was the big thing. As soon as I hopped in, was I'd played with the back end, but I wasn't going live anywhere. So I wasn't, testing that part. And so when I went to go live, it was like, oh, you need to log in to YouTube and get this link and a private key. And the same thing for Facebook. It wasn't just, hey, because with StreamYard, you set those things up once and then you just put a check mark. Like, here's where I'm going. So yeah, it was a fun experiment. And again, I might use them. For me, I think a great use of that tool for me is going to be when I do the podcast review show, because it's me, Eric K. Johnson, and a guest.
Yeah.
And right now, Eric and the guest are on the same channel. And there have been a couple times when either, like the last one we just did, the guest kind of hobbled together, because he always goes to a studio to record his podcast. He doesn't have like a home studio. So he kind of put one together and it was fine, but it would have been cool if I could have had those separate tracks. So what I do is I have Eric and a guest on the same track. And then I basically, every time we switch from somebody talking, I split the track and move them to their own track so I can add bass or take out reverb or whatever. So, but
Dave, I can't imagine streaming that to YouTube last week. You know, you changed the setting. We had folks come to the Riverside Landing platform, right? And they have a chat room there and some other things. That's where it's a little different than StreamYard too. StreamYard doesn't have a native platform. You have to be on LinkedIn, or you have to be on Facebook,
right.
You have to be on YouTube. And I couldn't imagine that experience on YouTube last week. Like
it actually was on YouTube. I'm not sure it was public, because I streamed it to YouTube, and when I got done, I was like, "Well, that's kind of cool." Then I moved it to private.
So there's an episode. Did it look as bad as on YouTube? Okay,
yeah. So that's when I got to see exactly what the audience was seeing, and I was like, "Oh, now I understand why people were leaving in droves." So
yeah, it was pretty brutal.
Yeah, and then they're asking, Camtasia is still around. Why not Blackmagic Design, DaVinci Resolve? This is one of those cases where that's what I learned on, and that's what I know.
Yeah.
I mean, going back to late 90s, probably, when I was working in the corporate world, I was doing a lot of kind of tutorials and stuff on Camtasia. So I've always known it. I know there's even openshot.org is kind of the Audacity of video. If you just not so much screen capture, but if you want to edit video, it's actually pretty cool. I tried to put the video into that. I was playing with that, and I was like, yeah, no, thank you. So I said,
well, it was a struggle for sure. I think if we had, just from a learning experience, if that was our option, we would definitely need to sit down and figure out how to optimize it for us. Like, okay, how do we make this thing work better? Well, and then your content starts to change. Like we're so used to this format here on YouTube that if Riverside, say, StreamYard wasn't an option, right? We'd be like, okay, what's an optimal listening experience out there? What can you take advantage of? Because it has some great components in it and some great things, some strengths, so to speak. But we were definitely a square peg going into a round hole, and as the edges were coming off, it was ugly. So, it was very, very ugly. So, I think from a podcaster's lesson standpoint, again, that would be one of those things: practice. If that's what if you were going to go with Riverside or any of these platforms, don't do what we do and just go live on it and give it a try. Although you got to see it in its raw form. I mean, that's kind of the benefit of most people would give up, and we're just too stubborn. So we just keep going, right? You get to see the good, the bad, and the ugly.
Andreas says, I'm putting together a list of books. Well, I know one.
Yeah.
This one would be good. Profit from your podcast. Some guy named Dave Jackson wrote that. Make Noise by Eric Newsom is good. He worked for NPR. I don't have it in physical form, but Storyworthy by Matthew Dix is great. David Hooper's book, Big Podcast, is a weapon and a book. You can take somebody out with this one. Let me think what else here. Oh, this one's pretty good. Podcast Growth. This is Colin Gray's book. And some of these I think were blog posts that they put together, but it's like, I don't know, 57 different ideas of growing your podcast.
Great way to write a book. Great way to write a book is blog it first.
If you're an NPR style person out on the wire, the only thing I hate about this book by Jessica Abel is it is a it's not a comic book. It's a, what's the right phrase for this? It's a graphic novel.
Cartoon.
Yeah. And I kind of got this and was like, can I get the pamphlet that this is in print? And like, it's like for,
it reads quick then, right?
Yeah. But those are probably some of my top ones. The one I talk about a lot is this one too. Stop Chasing Influencers. So by Jared Easley and Kumanzi Constable, because so many people like, if I could just get Pat Flynn on my show, and I'm like, not that Pat is a great guy. I love Pat Flynn. He's super funny, but that's not the somewhere in the future I'm going to have to do an episode called There Are No Silver Bullets.
Yeah.
Because so many people think if I could just do this headliner. Remember when headliner was going to be the next big silver bullet, and we're all going to do Instagrams and get 10,000 downloads, and then it was like, oh, we're going to
audiograms, and we're going to do blabs, and we're going to, I like on that influencing thing, I wish I want them to ask me. Right. That's I think that is the best possible scenario on a big guest, that they'll be like, hey, can I come on your show?
On your show?
And I know people are like, oh, that's never going to happen. But it can. I'm sure Marin didn't think in a million years the president would ever be on his,
right.
Obama would ever be on his podcast. And I don't know how that came together. I'm sure they had to ask the president, but
actually, it's the opposite.
Really?
Yeah. They contacted him via his website. And I think it was because his daughter was like, you should go on his show.
Oh yeah. 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 So how great is that? Okay, we don't have to be extreme with the president of the United States, but, in the space you're in, if you get folks who approach you and say, no, I'm really, really interested in doing this, they're just so much better of guests. I think sometimes you got to kind of weed it out a little bit. You have to find out because it may become on for a gigantic sales pitch, and that depending on how good of a host you are, you can actually turn that sales pitch sometimes to your advantage. So that's not always a loss either. Sometimes you can use that in your favor. But you kind of have to figure out the motives. But if they're asking you, if it's a guest you're always hoping for, and they're asking you, God, that is so great. I think that's the pinnacle of it.
Yeah. Somebody in the Facebook group at the School of Podcasting, please put those books in the comments. I will add them to the Facebook group when we're done here. But yeah. So there's tons of them. I guess I think it's Stefan was saying there's a book from NPR out that's good. I haven't heard of that one yet. Beyond Powerful Radio is there as well. Yeah, that's the one that most people go, oh yeah, I love it, because that's the one where the infamous quote, "There is no such thing as too long, only too boring," from Valerie Geller. This is used as a textbook. And that's why it's like $37. People are like, wait, why is that book so much? I'm like, it's a textbook. But that's where that came from. I have this in the physical form. I also have the Kindle book. The Kindle book is just nothing but highlights. But yeah, people love to give me as Dave Jackson said, I'm like, nah, I quote that a lot, but that's a Valerie Geller quote.
Yeah.
So
do you have the audio turned on for Clubhouse at this point?
I do.
Kevin was saying he was out there. Do you have your audio unmuted on Clubhouse? Maybe that's the
No, he should be hearing me.
Yeah. Okay. Well, that's fine.
Yeah. If he wants to come on stage, feel free to raise your hand and I'll bring him up. Be happy to.
I was on Clubhouse. I was on a program. Oh, now my audio just, okay, there we go. Ooh, that was interesting. Did you guys see my video lock up there? Oh, I don't know what that was. Maybe the shed. Can you hear me?
Oh yeah,
okay,
you're
good.
Fine.
So, okay, I'm in the shed and on unexpected things. Although I had my Mac reboot on me by itself twice this week, so I'm a little concerned about that one too. Going in, your equipment, it's always, you're always kind of. I did a Clubhouse and we had 50 or 60 in there at one point. So I think there's still signs of life out there. We don't see them, but I don't think we work it either. To make sure. I mean, I think Clubhouse is still one of those places you got to go out and be out there all the time and market the crap out of it and some of those things to get those listeners to come over. I don't think you can just put up a storefront, so to speak, and your customers are going to come running in the door, right? So Clubhouse I still think is an interesting experiment. And it's got really, really quiet as far as news out of Clubhouse, right? We're just not, that hit with such a splash, and now it's super quiet. So interesting to see. I bet they get sold.
There's so many. I mean, there's Clubhouse, there's Spotify, Facebook's working on one. Amazon is working on one. So it used to be like it was this new thing and it was the only place to get it. And then you could only get on it if somebody gave you an invite.
Yeah.
And so it kind of went from, wow, how do I get into there, to like, wow, there's one every 10 feet. So,
well, and even those things have gotten quiet. Twitter was supposed to come up with one, and Facebook. It's kind of like when Instagram had stories, and then everybody added stories, and it was stories for the longest time, and now nobody's doing stories. So it is. I think all these platforms rushed to do this audio ripoff of Clubhouse. Right. Only to realize, well, there's only so much space in that audio only market.
Right.
And nobody okay, so now what? And it's just this, I think it's kind of landed kind of flat. It's in the trough for sure. If we think of the Gartner hype cycle, that it peaked in terms of hype and talk and whatever, and then it starts to go down. It is definitely in the trough right now. And
yeah.
I've talked to a few folks who are on Clubhouse, and they're like, I don't know how much longer we're going to do this, because
I need to talk. I know Rob Greenlee was doing a thing on Thursdays, and he hasn't invited me on. So he either thinks I don't want to do it, or, I need to email him and go, are we still doing the Thursday thing?
Yeah.
He had a decent group over. He was the guy that dived in, and was really into Clubhouse for a while and really thought it was going to be, something that was going to not do what it's doing, which is kind of slowly fading away. But,
I don't, it's so nichey, it's just such a niche of a niche, this audio only come up on stage. And I am not a giant fan of that format anyways. And that's my own personal preference. I'm not saying it's good or bad. That's just my personal preference, but it just seems so small from a potential audience, and no recording. And that's maybe 12 years of podcasting where you're like, what? It's not recorded somewhere? How can that even be? But it is.
I forget who I was listening to, and they made a really good point. They said, I don't have enough time in the day to make content that doesn't stick around.
Mm-hmm.
And I was like, that's a really good point.
Yeah.
Stefan's asking, what about Welder for remote interviews? I've never used them. I think I'm an affiliate, if I remember right, because they approached me. The one thing I thought was interesting about them is they were definitely going for the Joe Rogan kind of audience, because their demo video had a bunch of F-bombs in it. Like it was like the bros, it was just like
hose and bros.
Yeah, kind of thing. And I was just, look, I'm not a prude. I wasn't offended. I was just like, well, that's a difference. And I was like, wow, they're going for that market, but it was, kind of different. So, but we have somebody coming in, and speaking of bros, there you go. He's a bloke. He's from
James.
James,
what's up?
How are you, buddy?
All right, man.
Can you guys hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you fine.
Sound great.
Oh, awesome. Yeah, it's good to see you guys.
Good to see you.
Yeah, I had a question kind of about intros. Sounds kind of weird, but go with it. So when you guys are creating a show intro, and let's say you have a high-profile guest on your show, is it better to just kind of jump in with the interview with them versus, doing your own kind of casual intro with your co-host where you talk about other stuff before actually inviting the guest on? Does that make sense? Like, do you want that guest to kind of be waiting for you to introduce him while you're recording? Or should it be...
Are you live? Are you live or just recording?
Just recording right now.
Yeah, throw them up front.
Yeah. What I did with, I'm having Melissa from Wit and Wire on this week on the School of Podcasting. And I just said, okay, I'm going to say, thanks for coming on the show. You can say something like, glad to be here, whatever I said. But at this point, I've just spent probably 30 seconds saying wonderful things about you. I said, I'm not going to make you sit through that. I said, right. And I go, so Melissa, thanks for coming on the show. And she goes, thanks for having me. And that's how I always start every show, because that way, a lot of times I will do an intro and I'll be like, hey, this week we're talking with Jim Cullison. He's the guy from theaverageguy.com, and he's the blah, 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 yada, blah, blah. And all of a sudden I find out later it's theaverageguy.tv. And I've like totally horked the intro. So I almost always re-record the intro. Plus, I don't know when I'm doing the intro, I know where we want to go. I have questions in front of me, but in the middle, like Jim reveals that he was captured by aliens, and and I was like, okay, so that's got to go into the intro, as a tease. So,
or record it at the end, James.
Okay,
record the intro at the end.
Yeah,
they're comfortable by that. They're comfortable by that time, right? You're going to get that. So Dave, I think Dave taught me this method. So just start doing it. Just start talking to them and get the interview rolling. Again, if it's not live, it doesn't matter, right? So get them answering questions, right? They get more and more comfortable as they go. Then come back around to what's gonna be the beginning and introduce them because they're the most comfortable. And then maybe ask them a personal question that you're gonna cut that whole piece out and move it to the beginning. And because they're super tight when you first start, right? They're kind of, I don't know what I'm doing here, but by the end they're like, woohoo, So move that woohoo to the front to kind of get that audience engagement, but do it at the end.
That's a good point. I think about that. Yeah, it's funny because you just think about when you're planning this stuff out, like you guys said, you kind of want them to hear the intro that you've written for them, but at the same time, sometimes we add. Yeah,
do you?
Yeah,
I think
kind of like ad lib some fun stuff at the beginning too. So
people get embarrassed, James, on their own intro sometimes. Like when you sit there and read all these accolades about them, they get a little embarrassed. Like they're like, oh my God, right? Oh my God. Okay, stop. Enough already, right there.
I was going to say, how many times have you heard a really good intro and they go, okay, I don't know how to follow that.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? It's like, he invented sliced bread and cured cancer. It's Jim Cullison. Thank you. And he's like, yeah.
Well, and guests are pretty good about introducing themselves. I find keeping a short, you don't want to say, hey, Bob, welcome, but to say Bob is a boom, Bob, welcome, like a short, and then say, hey, tell me a little bit, let's get to know you a little bit. Tell me about where, and then you can kind of direct the bio and have it and hear it from them, as opposed to, listen, as soon as I hear somebody reading a bio, I am gone.
Oh, like I
am like,
they've gone to LinkedIn.
And they're and they, you can tell the words,
not like copying and pasting from like their website or something like that.
Yeah, you're just like, oh my God, this is good. Oh, I'm out, right? So, those are some tips. Yeah.
My favorite is on today's show. I'm so excited to have this guy here, and here's why. He works for Gallup. If you want to learn about how to do a poll, this is the man you want to talk to. So when I am saying why I'm excited, like, hey, we've got somebody great. Okay, but why? Why is this person great? But if you say, here's why I'm excited that this person is here, because the audience is relying on you to find a good guest.
Sure.
So I could say that, Jim's, sliced bread, cured cancer, blah, blah, blah. But when I say, and also, today he's going to talk about how he raised, 37 kids on 15 cents a week. Okay, or whatever it is, so.
Yeah, I get that. It's a good point. And I think a lot of people too, like, especially when I'm writing out like the titles and some of the show note ideas, like I think a lot of people initially get drawn to that, right? They see the title of the show before like hearing about specifically who you have. I mean, I guess it depends on who you have really, but just trying to get the right formats down and trying to figure out,
right.
Timing and all that. But
one of the things I've had success with interviewing, and I've done thousands of interviews on the Gallup side. Now they're all most of the time they're live, so I have to follow that live format. But what I like to do when I'm just doing an interview for a recording is say, hey, I'm going to turn the recorder on. We're not starting yet. I'm just checking levels. And so you get it started and you ask them some questions and some throwaway questions and some things to do. And then at one point, like you'll sense they're comfortable and they're like, hey, let's just get into this thing and then ask a question, right? You can always come back and put in an intro, after the fact, but you get them comfortable where you can see it, you can sense it. They settle back in. Man, anything after that is usually going to be pretty good. So and that's kind of where you want to start. You can just say, hey, let's just start this thing, and boom, you guys might hear the national defense sirens just went off. It must be, it's 10 o'clock in the central time zone here in Nebraska. So I apologize for that.
Well, I've been working on just brushing up some of the interview stuff for the School of Podcasting. So I was researching Sean Evans, who's the guy from Hot Ones. And then I was researching Jordan Harbinger. And he said what he does is he'll go out and look at their social. And so if he sees that, whatever, they just went skiing in Aspen, he'll be like, hey, welcome to the show. I've pressed record, but this isn't going to be used. I'll let you know when we're starting if we're going to use Jim's thing. And I was checking out your social. I see you just went to Aspen. And he goes, you get that whole chit chat going on. And especially if you like to ski too. And then he goes, that's a lot of times. And he goes, I don't care if they like me. He goes, because I might ask a few tough questions. He goes, but I do need them to trust me. And I was like, that's an interesting take on interviews. So, because there were times like he interviewed the crazy basketball player, Dennis Rodman. And I guess at one point, Jordan asked him, like, what's up with the crazy? Like, that was his question. And he said, because the guy that was interviewing Jordan was like, how did you have the courage to ask that question? And he's like, look, I don't expect it. They don't always have to like me, but I'd done my research and they kind of knew that he always asks a question that the interviewer instantly knows, wow, this guy's done his research. So
actually makes me think of another question then. So when it comes to like prepping the show, like, should you send the guests like an idea, like some of the questions that you might ask so they have a good sense of what you're going to kind of throw at them? Or is it better to be like, we're going to talk about this topic, but I'm not actually going to tell you what questions are coming up?
That's what I do.
Yeah.
I usually go like in Melissa's case, I said, look, I realized we could talk podcast planning. We could talk this, we could talk booking. I go, you're here. We're going to talk about creating courses because I just read this study where the number one way people are monetizing is by creating courses. And she was like, oh, cool. All right. And she was actually really cool about it because technically she's my competition. And she even said at the end of the interview, she's like, I try to like stay in my course lane. She goes, I don't want to step on your toes. I'm like, nah, it's cool. So, yeah, so that's what I do. I've given the actual questions 3 times, and one time I got someone who was so well prepared, Dave, with their answer. Thank you so much for asking that they had written it out ahead of time. And I was like, okay, never doing that again. So Jim, what do you do? I know you do a lot.
Yeah, sorry, you heard a little noise behind me, but I actually have the guests provide an outline of what they think their best content is, and they send it to me in advance. And then we kind of we do a pre-call and we go over that, and I take a few notes in the process. And then again, I'm kind of guest centric, so I want to hear what they think their most important things are. And the questions, that way they've kind of written them. So that's kind of my method.
Yeah, because especially if it's something like what's your favorite book or something that they have to go, I try to give those questions ahead of time. Because otherwise I'm relying on their skill of improv. Like if I really come up with some out of the way questions, then it's like, which is fine. I always say if somebody takes a second to come up with a question, don't start giving them options. Like, what was the worst time when you felt the worst doing, what was that like? And then people go, was it when your dad died? Was it when the cat got ran over? They start, it's like, no, just let them think that hard question over, because on the other side of awkward silence is usually a really good answer.
And listen, different is not always interesting. Coming up with these weird questions of, like, so
what kind of tree would you be?
Yeah, that's not always interesting, right? You just kind of like, so quit doing that. Unless it is interesting. Right. It's I think Harry does this on his show where he's got 3 questions at the end and they're personal in nature. And I think they're pretty good questions. So, but different isn't always interesting.
Yeah. That's good to know. Thanks, guys. I appreciate this. It's been awesome.
Good. Great to see you. Like we see so much of you in the chat, and I think you called in one time, but great to see your face.
Currently dealing with newborn, and so he hasn't been crying so much. So I'm very grateful for that. But yeah, it's been very kind of flux recently.
Congratulations on that. But your podcasting days are changing for sure.
Little bit.
Any tips on someone who has maybe has one in the a bun in the oven? Like, how are you handling that? Because obviously, you can't tell a 3-week-old, daddy's got a podcast now. You can't have a tantrum right now. So.
Right. So what I did actually, as it got closer to the due date, is I planned out 3 episodes that I'd already had released and chose to rerun those. So I already kind of preset in my podcast hosting Buzzsprout. I already said, okay, so these episodes are going to drop here. And then on social media and everywhere else, is like, hey guys, date's coming up. So just be ready. These episodes are going to drop. And then obviously, as you know, I had a little bit of free time, I was able to kind of give people like a short episode update. It was like kind of 15 minutes. And then obviously coordinating with my co-host as well, saying, hey, I mean, this is kind of the situation now. I can maybe find some free time here and here. But yeah, I mean, it was just finding those kind of windows, just kind of working with the time that we had. But yeah, I've got to, you know, give credit to co-host and obviously my wife as well, because, you know, they were great in allowing me to do this stuff. But it's tricky. I'm not going to lie. Yeah. Everything kind of gets put on pause.
And that's one where, much like Jim Siren, you know, it's like nothing we could do about it. You know, he muted when he could. And, you know, I think your audience would be like, you know, and you're like, oh, and that's, you know, that's my son or daughter in the background, you're hearing whatever, blah, blah, blah. And, you know, I don't think anybody's going to be like, well, how dare you let your child inside, you know?
Right.
So,
but when it comes to like the high, you know, the high profile guests and well, any guests actually, I've always been kind of conscious, maybe we should record, you know, somewhere else. And we have been recording at my co-host's place just so we can kind of be away from the potential noises. But yeah, I guess kind of having somewhat mind on it and just kind of planning around it is always going to be a best bet, I think.
Yeah. You had a son, right? If I remember right?
Yep. Mm-hmm. Yep.
Okay.
Congrats on that. That's always great.
Yeah. Fun.
Appreciate it. Yeah.
And by the way, this is
a little bit more free time.
Very short period of time. I think people get into this mode and then they're like, it's over. And these phases go very, very fast at this age. So, you know, they're not that young very long. And if you can kind of just survive through it, pretty soon they're walking around. It's a different problem at that point, but
a whole new phase.
Those phases go pretty fast. So, you know, so don't think it's going to last forever.
And that was the thing too. I was very conscious about. I wanted to keep this going, and I, you know, obviously my co-host was like, you know, we want to keep this train rolling, so to speak. And so that's why we were kind of so like getting ahead of the game in terms of the plan.
Yeah.
And all that. So
lean on that co-host too. Like this is a time when if the co-host's not in the same situation, like maybe they can step it up a little bit and do a little bit more of those. And, you know, it's especially in a situation where if you're the founder and like in Dave and I's situation, like this is really his show, right? I just get to tag along for the most part. But if Dave ran into a situation where it was like, hey, for the next 6 months, I still want to do this, but I can't do these kinds of things. Well, that'd be a great opportunity for me to step in and say, okay, what can I take from you during this time so I can make it easier for you to be here?
Sure.
And so it's just that's a great opportunity. If the non-founding or because it's never 50-50, right?
Sure.
Maybe sometimes, but it's mostly in the case of like Dave and I, it's probably 80-20 or 90-10. I mean, Dave does all the heavy lifting on this thing.
I think that sums it up. Like, I don't think my co-host will mind me saying, but obviously I do the majority of the work. I'll prep it and he just kind of like, okay, just tell me what it's about. I'll do a little bit of prelim research, but I didn't, and in the same sense, I didn't want to suddenly be like, all right, I need this episode from you. I need you to record this on your own and do this, you know.
But
kind
James,
of finding
maybe they've
balance.
been waiting. Maybe they've been waiting for that moment, right? If you didn't ask, right? Maybe they were like, oh yeah, you know, I'd really like, now you got to let them do what they like. They're going to bring a different spin to this and you got to let them kind of do it, but you don't know until you ask.
True. Good point. Yeah. Good point. Yeah. So, but yeah, we got through it for the most part. So we'll see what other things happen.
Good. Well, congratulations.
Appreciate it. I'm grateful for you guys too. I think all this information has been solid. Good. So thank you.
You bet.
Thank you, man.
You bet.
We'll
Thanks for joining us.
Have a great one.
You bet. And, you know, Dave, I was thinking our awesome supporters, that'd have been awesome during the sirens because they could have muted, you know. So I do need a little more coffee.
You do need some coffee.
We're a little late on that.
That's all right.
No, it's good.
We always like to thank our awesome supporters, people like James over at the Dog Podcast Network. If you've got a dog and you need something to listen to while you're walking around the block, letting Fido do his business, check out Dog Podcast Network. They got short shows, long shows, you know, whatever you need, it's there. And they've even got a contest over there. Check it out, dogpodcastnetwork.com. We always thank our $20 supporters, people like Greg over at indiedropin.com. If you've got a true crime or a comedy or a scary story, you can hand a couple episodes over to Greg and he will put it in front of an audience that's looking for that kind of stuff. Shane over at tourpreneur.com. If you operate a tour business or plan on starting one, well, this is the podcast for you, tourpreneur.com. And Glenn is, I think, on his way home finally after being out on the road for 5 weeks. He's over at Horse Radio Network. So if you like horses, check it out. He's got a ton of shows over there. Ed Sullivan, where Jim will be hanging out with Ed in 2 weeks. 2 weeks. He's going to Baston, and you can find Ed over at soniccupcake.com. Felix over at the LatinPodcastAwards.com. It's dedicated to enhancing the visibility of Latinx podcasts around the world since 2017. Max Trescott up in the air at aviationnewstalk.com. So if you're a pilot and like aviation, check him out, aviationnewstalk.com. If you need help with your audio, check out KJST Media. It's an LGBTQ plus founded company focused on helping all levels of podcasters to grow their podcast. Regardless of what you're looking for, they're here to help you at kjstmedia.com. Greg at debtshepherd.com, where he teaches financial wellness. Find him at debtshepherd.com. Kim over at Toastmasters101.net. If you're looking to develop your voice, reduce your editing time, and improve your content, Toastmasters101.net. And if you'd like to be an awesome supporter, if you're thinking, I'm going to let somebody else do that, well, you said that last week and they didn't come through. So it's time to go over to askthepodcastcoach.com/awesome and become an awesome supporter. Or if you want just a one-time option, you can go to askthepodcastcoach.com/store, where you can also sponsor Jim's mug, buy my book, one-time donations, all sorts of fun stuff over at askthepodcastcoach.com/store. And we have a ton of really good questions in the chat room. I want to go back. Thomas had one. Andreas had another one. Thomas asked about, I'm trying to find it, but do you let the guest know that you're going to do the intro later?
Yes.
And my answer is yes. With Melissa, I just said, hey, I'm going to say nice things about you later. I'm just going to make you sit through them now. And then there was another one.
It's actually good practice. You could do it up front once as practice and then do the thing and then come back around and do it. That's a beauty if you're not live. That doesn't seem weird. And even if you are live, it doesn't matter. It's your thing. You can do what you want, right? So it gives you practice time too to at least say it once.
Well, the other thing I always let the guests know is this is not a live radio show. Right. So anything you mess up, feel free to just go, can I do that again? We'll pause for 5 seconds and then we'll do it again. I typically let them know why they're here and who they're talking to. So I'm like, I brought you on to talk about, creating a course, how many, what kind of audience do I need? What do I charge? Things like that. That's where we're going to go. You're talking to people who are fairly geeky at times. So if you want to get geeky, so I kind of let them know who their audience is. I let them go back, I had a thing and it went right out of my head.
Sometimes like it does that.
Yeah. I did see where somebody said the Zoom stuff is going up. I think we're going to see a lot of prices going up because getting things, here it is. Andreas said, I want to do a brand new intro for our podcast for our second season. What suggestions beyond what David Hooper suggests about the structure of the voice in the big podcast book? I don't know. An intro to me is, I think the essence of an intro should either capture their attention and make them want to hear more, explain what the show is, explain what the episode is, and if you want a little bit about yourself so people get the answer, why should I listen to you? And if you can do that in, a couple minutes.
Seconds.
30 seconds is great.
30 seconds is awesome if you can, and practice it. If you're going to read it, if it's going to be a host read every week, every day, whatever you're doing, practice it long before you actually do it. I think, Dave, you're good at this, is kind of have it kind of alliterate, if that makes any sense. In other words, I like the triplets, of putting, I'm here to do this, this, and this. News, reviews, product updates, and conversation. That's a phrase that we use on Home Gadget Geeks all the time. In the intro for Called the Coach, I have 2 of those. They're 3 each. That they share tactics, insights, and strategies. Again, I can say that to help coaches maximize the talent of individuals, teams, and organizations around the world. That those triplets kind of help people, I think, remember those things, and it helps you remember them. If you have a whole long list of things, and if it's written, don't read it like you write it, because that's awkward.
Yeah.
Practice it and get it and write it the way you'd say it, not the way you want it to look, if that makes any sense.
Yeah. Throw grammar out the window.
Totally.
But if you think about it, Rush Limbaugh always had his little intro that he did. Dave Ramsey, we're content or we're cash is king and whatever it is, he's got his thing that he says all the time. So
there is I think a little Pavlovian effect to that. I think the music does that as well. But when they know, when I did this big, I did a live podcast in front of, these at a conference one time. And I said, I am Jim Collison live from the Gallup studios. They knew that because I say that phrase every time. They knew where they were like, oh, okay, we're going to do a podcast. Right. And so I think there's some power to that repetition.
Well, Jimmy Fallon for a long time used to say, welcome to the Tonight Show. You made it. You're here. And there was one other thing, but it was like every week he'd be like, welcome to the Tonight Show. You made it. You're here.
Yeah.
So,
it also helps you, I think, like gets you comfortable. It allows you to say things during a live show. Then you're thinking about, okay, what do I got to do next? And you can say the intro while you're thinking about that,
Yeah. Dan was saying, when it comes to giving people the questions ahead of time, not everyone needs them, but I had a guest who had been able to come on with the original sort documents to quote them.
Yeah.
Because I sent the questions ahead of time. See, there's always going to be pros and cons. When you give them the questions, boy, they're really well prepared, and that can be great unless they're memorizing their answer and they are saying it like this because they've planned it. That's, like I said, I've only had that happen once. I've heard other people say that.
Dan's had some really great guests, though. As I've been listening to his podcast, he's got some really great guests, and he's got a good way of kind of working through the content in an interesting kind of way. And so, it's all historical in nature, and that could be really dry and boring. And they do a nice job of kind of mixing that. That may be a nice study if you haven't. If you're maybe you're in that historical space, go out to basedonatruestorypodcast.com and have a listen to the way Dan does his interviews. And, you don't have to be Dan, but I think, Dave, studying the way other people, you've taught me a lot of things as we've spent time together. I think studying other podcasters and going, oh yeah, I kind of want to do it like that. And then I need to make it my own. I think that's a really smart thing to do. Yeah.
I heard a show, I can't remember the name and I wouldn't say it if I could, but they literally it'd be like me starting off the show going, all right, Podcast Nation, thank you so much for being here. I am so stoked that you are here. Are you ready to pod? It's like, come on. I've heard shows, and it's usually Nation. So welcome, Washcloth Nation. Welcome to the Washcloth Podcast. Let's get ready to wash. And I was like, really? And I just come on, and it's always Nation, and it's always let's get ready to, and I know we have a let's get ready to podcast, but it's
be careful.
But if I say are you ready to wash, then I know you're doing and I'm just really, come on, guys.
Make it your own, and in that sense, it's and James just put it's almost like script versus being organic, and I think you need to be both. I have a teacher here that they're a friend and teacher at Gallup that always says, spontaneity is always best done in the context of lots of preparation. And so he over prepares, but then when he's on the program, it looks spontaneous, but it's tons of content, right? So I think you have to do both. I think you have to, you over prepare and then make it look like it's spontaneous. I think that's the what you're looking for, right?
Yeah, Thomas in the School of Podcasting says, great stuff, guys. Can you post your pre-interview structure before you speak with your guest? I'm not sure.
Well, in other words, what's your outline? What are you trying to do? What are you trying to achieve? It comes from them, from me anyways. I ask them for an outline first. What are you hoping to, what would you tell, what do you want to tell the audience? And it's custom for every single one.
Yeah, that's something that I should do that I don't. I should say, is there anything you definitely want me to hit?
Yeah.
What do you want out of this? Because I usually tell them, here's why you're here. Here's who you're talking to. Is it okay if we go about 40 minutes? I'm going to edit it later, so don't worry about sounding stupid.
Or time.
Or
like
time.
that removes the time thing too. Like if the time pressure on them, like, hey, I'm going to edit this down. So just say things. And if I don't want, if it didn't work, I'll take it out.
Yeah.
So
I need to start asking people, how long do I have you? I know we're set for an hour, but how long do you have a hard out? Because that takes pressure off me sometimes if we're running over. Like the Adam Curry thing, I was freaking out because he was giving me really great answers, but they were long. And I was looking at it like, oh, I got to get this. I have to get these questions in, and I've only got 9 minutes left. And we get done. We talk for like another 20 minutes. I was like, if I would have known that, I wouldn't have been so freaked out about it. So, but yeah, that's basically what I do. I say, hey, first of all, thank you so much. Can you tap your mic for me?
Yeah.
Great. Okay. That's good. It's not live. Here's why you're here. Here's who you're talking to. Is there anything we definitely want to hit for you? What are you looking to get out of this? Okay, great. I'll definitely mention your website. I'll definitely, there'll be links in the show notes. So it's not live. Don't worry about it. And I saw on, Facebook that you do skiing, and start talking about them, and then, adjust the audio levels. At that point, make sure I hit record on everything, and then just say, all right, Jim, thanks again for coming on the show. And Jim will say,
yeah, it's great to be here.
And then I'm like, and then that first question is where I do not ask, tell me a little bit about yourself. I would say, so Jim, like, when did you know you wanted to be a podcaster? Right. I get him to a story that is like, Eric Newsom's book, Make Noise, has a great thing. He's like, what's the one question that only that person can answer? And I went, oh, that's good. That's a thinker there.
Although you might, even that first question, Dave, may be a throwaway. It could be a throwaway question to get them talking.
Yeah.
Because again, you kind of want to loosen them up a little bit. So if you're feeling like they're still a little tense, throw a question or two that you're just going to edit out. You don't want to throw stupid questions in there, because they'll be like, why is he asking me this dumb question?
Yeah. Well, and sometimes I'll even do that. I'll be like, hey, I'm going to say, welcome to the show. You can say, glad to be here. By the way, the first question is going to be, when did you know you wanted to get into podcasting?
Totally.
And then just, that way, because it gives them a little chance to go, especially if you give them kind of a softball question.
Yeah.
Then they're like, oh, well, this is easy. This isn't as bad as I thought it was going to be.
I was doing an interview. Oh, this wasn't that long ago. Maybe a month ago, and I had prepped the guest and was like, okay, here's where we're going. Here's what we want to do. And I asked that first question, let's get to know you. I always like that. Let's get to know you a little bit. Tell me a little bit about your background and some of the things that you've been doing around coaching. And I got 15 minutes of just unloaded on the life story. And we were able to break it up and use it a little bit, but even in the best cases, when you prep the guests, you walk through it, you say, this is what we're going to do. You're going to have those moments where somebody just checks out for a moment or loses their mind or feels like they got to tell you everything. And it's just going to happen. You can't prevent everything. Sometimes it just happens. And it turned out okay in this case, but it does happen.
Yeah. Stephen says, if it gets too long, you can do 2 parts, or
I do that all the time, Dave.
But you can also do this and say, there is no such thing as too long, only too boring. I do a weird thing. It's a Dave thing. Nobody ever taught me this. It's something I did because I realized when I have a 40-minute presentation and I walk in someplace and they go, okay, you have 30 minutes. And I like, oh, I got to cut 10 minutes. That presentation is always better when it's shorter, because I have to figure out exactly what I'm trying to say. So I don't care if every question is phenomenal. I will cut one question. I have to cut one question. I don't know why I do. It's just something I do, because to me, I'm like, all right, which one of these is the one that delivered the least amount of value? And usually it's a question where they answered no, where I'll be like, so tell me about a time when you were doing such and such. And they're like, yeah, I don't think I've ever been in that. Okay, you're out of here. So,
well, you can also say you're in that situation. You could also say, I also wanted to cover this, but because of time, we can't. I'll be available right afterwards if you guys want to talk to me about this.
Right.
And then, then if you may get a handful of people who come up to you who want to talk to you about that question.
Yeah. The way I structure my interview is I've first of all, I go out and I listen to other interviews, and I listen for the questions that I wanted to ask and the host didn't. So I'm like, ooh, I would have liked, that would have been my follow-up question. So, and as I'm listening, I'm putting those into Evernote. So and I'm doing all sorts of research, putting it in Evernote, so that then when it comes time and I see all these questions, I'm like, okay, what are 5 of those? Like, what are the top 5 things that I want to get out of this interview? I have those on a piece of paper on my left-hand side. I have a piece of paper in front of me and a pen that doesn't click. And I ask
that's really good.
And I ask them that first question that gets them telling the story. And then from there, I just listen. And when they get done, if I don't have a follow-up question, I go to the piece of paper on my left and I ask question number 2. And I don't say things like, question number 2, let me ask you this. I don't say that, because you don't say that in real life. And if they've said something that I go, they say, oh, I knew I needed to stand out, I will just go to my piece of paper and write down stand out, and then go back to listening. And then when they get done, I'm like, hey, you just said you had to do something to stand out. What did you do to stand out? And when they get done with that answer, if there's nothing else that I wanted to follow up, I go back to my piece of paper. And it's just a matter of, I've got it. I kind of call the piece of paper on my left my game plan. And then the piece of paper in front of me is just to help me listen, because I don't want to have to remember this question while they're still talking. So,
that's great advice. Dump it on a piece of paper so you stop thinking about it and you have time to listen.
Yeah,
that's really important.
The worst thing ever is somebody's giving you something and you're like, oh, stand out. I got to remember, stand out. Okay, I'm still listening. Stand out. And you're not listening. Yeah. And then they say, and my brother was an alien. You're like, okay, stand out alien. And you're still trying to remember. If you just dump it on a piece of paper, you don't have to remember it. And then you can kind of see when you're done. If you kept going back to the paper on the left, you can look down and you see, oh, alien is here, and it's written, it's circled. Like, you said your brother was an alien. I don't know why I'm on aliens today, but I am. But
it's okay. It's a hot topic right now. Hot topic in America.
So that's basically, and it's one of those things. That's why I always tell people, before you do a real interview, I don't care if it's your parents, your kids, your cousin, or somebody, interview somebody, because you have to experience the circus of your brain going crazy while you do an interview, because it's something
that's where
tricky.
Over preparation helps a little bit.
Yeah. And over prep, I've seen it be a problem. And what that is you usually, but it's rare, but that's usually where you end up with the curse of knowledge, and you start talking about something and you're like, well, that one time with your laptop and you did the thing and blah, blah, blah. And they start talking about it and your audience is like, what's the thing with the laptop? Well, you know it because you did the research.
Right.
So, but that doesn't come into.
No, true. You're right. It is a balance, right? It's not one. It's not one or the other. You want to be prepared in that case to be able to know, but you don't want that preparation to steer you in the wrong direction and miss an opportunity during the interview, because they may say something. How many interviews have you watched like this? And I've heard you say this before, Dave, where someone's like, yeah, and then I met the president. And you go, okay, so let's talk then about, and you're like, whoa, wait a minute. Like, you go back, like, that's an interesting, like, how did that happen? And, so sometimes you can tell the interviewer who's just trying to jam through their questions.
They've got their questions. I haven't had one of those in a while, but I wanted to, if I got another one, I wanted to say something like, and the best microphone is the Samson Q2U. I once shot a man for snoring. And just see if they,
if they're like, listening. Okay,
next up, tell me about your aha moment. Yeah.
Well, and Craig had said a comment in the chat room. Have you ever not or refused to do an interview because the guest audio was bad or the information was bad? And that, Dave, that sometimes too, the question could be, have you been on an interview where you just know, like, oh, they weren't listening, this wasn't very good? And I've refused. I've had them at the end of the podcast. I said, I want to approve this before you make this live. Can you please make that available to me? And they said yes. And I said no. So that's, it's like, nah, I can't have you put that out. So I've said no, for sure.
Yeah. I've had one that I should have said, we need to reschedule. And I didn't, because I thought I could clean it up. And the minute I put it out, it sounded like I was talking to her over, 2 tin cans and a string in my audience immediately. And it was the weight loss show. So that audience isn't a bunch of new, they're like, whatever you did, that was horrible. That audio was just, because she was in a RV in Arizona. It was 100 and a bazillion degrees. And she's like, I'm not turning off my AC. And I said, okay, let's just be quiet for 30 seconds so I can get a nice noise capture of that, and I'll remove it later. And it did, but she just sounded like, okay, thanks, Dave.
Yeah.
Like, okay. She sounded like she was underwater. I was like, I should have.
It's hard.
Said, yeah,
it's hard.
But it's interviews are tricky. They're like anything else. The more you do them, the better you get at them. And it's just because you can there's the Larry King method, which I kind of don't get, where I want to go in as my audience who has no clue who you are. And then there's the Jordan Harbinger of the world that spend 20 hours, researching somebody. And I get that, because you're going to come up with better questions, but there's a time when you're like, that's, who's got.
Costas was a guy known for over preparation. Costas knows everything. Bob Costas.
I forgot about him.
Yeah.
And he was doing a show at like 1:30 in the morning, and he's still.
And he would, this guy would nerd out on his content. He knew everything that there was. He could pull a fact out of anywhere. So it was pretty incredible. So
I might put this into another show. When you do really long questions, and that's usually me, because I can't figure out. I've opened my mouth before my brain has figured out what I'm going to say. And that's when I was editing the Melissa interview that's coming out this week. I'm literally probably a 30-second question where I'm like, I saw where you did such and such, and you did. So I'm giving her the backstory. And is it kind of like this, or what did, and then there's like a little like baby pause, and the actual question will come out. And I was like, that's the part I need,
That's it.
It's like,
or you start answering the question for him. That's even worse, right?
There's one, I think it's in the blooper reel, where I asked her the question and then started to do this. And I said, hold on, I'm going to shut up and let you answer the question now. Yeah. And I was just one of those where you're consulting yourself as you're going.
Time it as we wrap this. Time the interview and say how much of it is you. I think Otter does this, otter.ai, right? Where it'll say this speaker had this much time and this speaker had this much time. Throw it into Otter. And if you are more than your guest, a package just arrived.
Yeah, I know.
If you are more than your guest, that's probably a problem. So it's a good thing to check out.
Yeah, that's I know I did a live Zoom call. So it wasn't really an interview. It was just a panel of people talking about each other. And Otter was so helpful, because I knew that Dave Jones said this somewhere. And I said, search for the word "a lot." Because remember Dave saying that happens a lot. And I found it. It was at the 46-minute mark. I went in, made a little clip of that. And I was like, oh, cool. So, but stick around. We've got some post show coming up. We want to thank everybody in the chat room. And again, thanks for everyone who suffered through last week. It was an interesting experiment.
We're sorry.
Yeah. And we love that you came back. But Jim, what's coming up on theaverageguy.tv?
Yeah, Bob and Ryan from thinkcomputers.org. If you want to nerd out on some hardware, we spent a bunch of time talking about these NVMe M.2 hard drives that are getting real popular in the space. By the way, if you want to if you're on a PC and you still have a spinning hard drive, you have a problem. So we can help you with that. Head out to theaverageguy.tv.
Yeah, and I mentioned on the School of Podcasting, I'm talking with Melissa from witandwire.com. She worked at Teachable for 4 years. So she has definitely been in the how to make an online course. And what I'm doing is I'm going to have 2 versions of that. One that's like a super deep dive that I'll probably put on my Profit from Your Podcast show, and then one that maybe isn't quite as in deep for the School of Podcasting if I have time to edit it out. But thanks to everyone in the chat room. Thanks to Mark from podcastbranding.co, the Dog Podcast Network, and Jim, the Beyond Something.
Yeah, no, based on it. There you go. Based on TrueStoryPodcast.com. Dan, thanks for your support in the show.
And we'll be back in just 2 seconds with some post show.